Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a rapidly developing and honestly incredibly complex geopolitical puzzle. We're looking at the stark, extreme contrast between the explosive public threats that are totally dominating the headlines right now and the quiet, super high-stakes peace talks currently happening behind closed doors between the United States and Iran. It's a classic, real-time case of public posturing versus diplomatic reality, and we're going to break down exactly what's happening on both fronts.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the contrast here is just wild. On one side, we've got the rhetoric coming from Iran's new supreme leader, Mojaba Kamei. He is vowing revenge for what he calls dishonorable murders. And then right on the other side, we have U.S. President Donald Trump, directly threatening massive retaliation with an arsenal he describes as locked and loaded. You have two heads of state publicly drawing deep lines in the sand, setting a very fiery tone on the world stage.
To help us make sense of this fast-moving crisis, here's our roadmap. 1. The war of words. 2. A week of violence. 3. The diplomatic table. 4. Demands and deadlocks. And finally 5. The precarious path forward.
Let's jump right into Part 1, the war of words. This is the public escalation between the heads of state.
So, following a massive 6-day funeral last week for his father, Ali Khamenei, the newly elevated supreme leader of Iran, Mojaba Kamei has issued some incredibly strong, unyielding statements. Now, he actually hasn't been seen in public since taking power, but his message, it's been crystal clear. He has promised to avenge his father's death, explicitly stating that it's the absolute desire of the Iranian nation. On top of that, he's categorized the killers involved early on in this U.S.-Iran conflict as criminal and dishonorable. So we're seeing rhetoric of absolute resolve from Tehran.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, the rhetoric from Washington is just as fierce. President Trump recently claimed there was an active assassination plot against him originating from Iran. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of his counterthreat: 1,000. Trump announced that 1,000 U.S. missiles are locked and loaded, aimed directly at Iran, with literally thousands more ready to immediately follow if the Iranian government acts on any plot against the sitting president. So the language from both sides is just absolutely uncompromising.
However, words are one thing, right? Let's move to Part 2, a week of violence, where we map out the actual proxy conflict on the ground.
Just 6 days ago, the massive funeral for Ali Khamenei wrapped up. By early last week, we saw direct violence erupt, with commercial ships being attacked right in the Strait of Hormuz. Then by midweek, the U.S. responded with widespread retaliatory strikes against Iran. Iran then hit back late in the week, specifically targeting U.S. allies in the Gulf. It was a severe, rapid uptick in regional violence. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how chaotic that week was before abruptly hitting the brakes. A sudden calm descended on Friday, leading directly to where we are today, with active negotiations actually underway in Oman.
Which brings us to Part 3, the diplomatic table, and this quiet, surprising push for peace in Oman.
To really understand today's talks, we have to look back at the agreement from mid-June that established a ceasefire meant to kickstart 60 days of wider peace talks and technical nuclear negotiations. But look at the current reality. It's starkly different. We're already a third of the way into that 60-day period, and the talks have been heavily faltering. Actually, President Trump has publicly stated that the ceasefire is entirely over, largely because of that week of violence we just mapped out. Yet despite those public claims, negotiations are technically still continuing.
And the stakes for these ongoing negotiations, they are incredibly high, which you can see by the gravity of the delegations sent to Oman. The U.S. has sent a highly prominent delegation that includes Vice President J.D. Vance. Sitting across from them is an Iranian delegation led directly by the Iranian foreign minister. Both nations have put their heavy hitters in the room. That really underscores just how absolutely critical finding a diplomatic off-ramp has become for both sides right now.
Let's look at Part 4, Demands and Deadlocks, specifically zooming in on the core dispute in the Strait of Hormuz.
The main geographical sticking point at the heart of these talks is the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, U.S. officials are demanding that Iran completely reopen it. Washington accuses Iran of restricting traffic by only utilizing the normal northern channel, which is the route closest to the Iranian border. So the U.S. demand is twofold here. First, they want the full strait fully reopened to international shipping, and second, they're demanding a public declaration from Iran guaranteeing that this has actually been done.
But getting to an agreement means navigating some profoundly conflicting narratives. The U.S. accuses Iran of improperly and dangerously restricting those international shipping channels. Tehran, meanwhile, firmly points the finger right back at Washington.
They accuse the United States of being fully responsible for causing the escalations and the violence we saw over the past week. It's a classic diplomatic deadlock, with both sides viewing the other as the primary aggressor.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Part 5, the precarious path forward. Basically, what comes next?
To gauge the official diplomatic stance on these existing agreements, look at the statement issued yesterday by Iran's ambassador to the UN. He stated, Iran remained committed to the faithful implementation of Memorandum of Understanding, provided that the United States fully and faithfully complies with its own obligation. This perfectly captures the deeply conditional nature of these talks. Every single step forward from one side is entirely contingent on the perceived compliance of the other.
So the crucial point is this. When we analyze all the source material, international analysts have reached a clear, albeit very tense, consensus. A full-blown escalation or an all-out war is fundamentally not in either side's national or economic interest right now. Both Washington and Tehran recognize the catastrophic cost of that reality. However, because the foundation here is so incredibly fragile, analysts warn that further sudden flare-ups of violence in the region remain highly possible even as these peace talks continue in Oman.
We are watching a profound balancing act unfold. On one hand, we have high-stakes diplomacy, with foreign ministers and vice presidents genuinely surging for a peaceful resolution. On the other, we have locked and loaded missiles and supreme leaders demanding vengeance. It leaves us with one critical question to consider as this situation develops. In a landscape this volatile, what will trigger the next flare-up? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this complex issue on This Explainer. Keep your eyes on Oman, and we'll see you next time.